Fantastic. Good morning and welcome. I am Mohammed Suleiman, a fellow with the cyber program at the Middle East Institute. I'm also a member at the Middle East practice at McCarty Associates, a strategic advisory firm based in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's opening panel, which will explore the growing digital transformation in the Middle East or North Africa, as well as the challenges associated with regulation, gender, and of course, COVID-19. The intersection between tech and business requires exceptional expertise to tie the different pieces together. I'm joined today by an excellent band of experts from across the region. First, we'll start with Selim Eddy, who's the Director and Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy for Google, Middle East and North Africa. Ayman Ismail, who is Abdul Latif Jamil Chair of Entrepreneurship and Associate Professor at the American University in Cairo, and also he is the founding director of AUC Venture Lab. And then we have Najda Al-Madfa, who is the general manager of Sharjah Entrepreneurship Center, a government entity that aims to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs and provide them with launchpad for success. She's also the founder of Khairat, a platform that aims at enabling young Emiratis to make informed career choices. We also have Dr. Fatma Sibai, who's an analyst at Darasat, the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. Her work examines the intersection of technology and public policy, including recent research on combating the spread of COVID-19 through information sharing. She has some technical problems, but we'll get her online quickly as possible. Just some housekeeping, although that this is a virtual meeting, I'll be taking audience questions through Zoom Q&A feature that you can see on your screen, which you can all see. For those calling in by phone or watching our panel on the live stream on YouTube, you can ask a question on Twitter with hashtag MEICyber or email us at events@mei.edu. Feel free to ask any question throughout the panel. I'll be looking at all of them and I'll try to feed them in the discussion as much as possible. I think my first question would be to Selim. I think we cannot really talk about digital transformation in the Middle East without mentioning big tech. How Google does see the digital transformation, digital policies across the region?
Good morning. Thank you, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I mean, so what's happening today is actually quite interesting because the situation that we are in, we've been in for the last 3-4 months, has forced somehow everyone to go on a digital platform like we're doing today. You know, in other circumstances, we would be all meeting in one place. The effect of this is acceleration of digitization. So one could say that time is bending and digitization is happening at a much faster rate than before. It's very important to understand this context. At the same time, innovation keeps happening at a faster rate. Adoption of digital technology has increased in the MENA region, definitely for the last 4 months. Just to give you an idea, we're in MENA, there's the Arab world, let's say, there's 500 million inhabitants. 60% of them use internet as of December 2019. Now the rate has accelerated, and I will not be surprised to see a spike if research is conducted for end of June, mid-year. What this means is that digitization has become part of everyday's life. More people are going more on YouTube to watch cooking shows, to have their own stuff, and most importantly, learning. Because schools were closed in the MENA region, so e-learning has peaked. And also, when you want to consult a doctor, you also now have in many places in the Middle East the facility of going online and doing that. What does it mean to your question of digital and policy and all that? It is critical because policies can actually unlock the potential of digitization, and the right policies can create opportunities. I'm so happy to have Dr. Najla and Dr. Ayman, who are both into entrepreneurship, very much so. You know, the entrepreneur is at the heart of all this, and the entrepreneur is the one that leads small and medium-sized enterprises, the existing ones and the startup. I know that we have a tendency in tech to focus on the startup, but I think the real opportunity today is to unlock the potential of those millions of SMEs that exist in the MENA region that are operating, and because of the situation cannot really sell their products unless they go online. They cannot exist anymore without being online. So we used to say this. I mean, I know the panelists, we've all been advocates for massive digitization for many years. So now this is forced upon us in a way. I say this with a little bit of sadness, because a lot of people are suffering. A lot of entrepreneurs and enterprises are suffering. So to answer your question, Mohammed, it is absolutely urgent. Is a call for action to put the right policies in place to enable entrepreneurs, not only to create new businesses. That's a given, of course, but also very important is to bring the existing SMEs into online. And once you bring them along, it's not enough. You need to also teach them how to exist online, how to prosper online, how to survive online, to sell online, etc. So this is a construction site as we speak. The policies, the digital policies. We like construction sites in the Middle East. We understand that very well. So this is where we are, and a lot of work ahead of us.
Actually, I will take Salim's advice and I'll ask a question to Najla. You work with entrepreneurs. So my question to you, how is the landscape for SMEs will change in the Gulf? Specifically COVID, geopolitical unrest, and where does you see opportunities for SMEs during this time through like widespread digital adoption or transformation?
Thank you, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. You know, I agree with Salim. Overall, yes, obviously there has been a bit of an upheaval amongst, you know, both startups, depending on what industries they're in, and SMEs. But I really do think that in general, this is an opportunity for entrepreneurship, for SMEs, and for the ecosystem as a whole. I think it's going to be an extraordinary opportunity for countries in the GCC to start looking inwards and really building more resilient sort of countries and more resilient sectors. And I think you'll see that, you know, a lot of the times, I think up until now, maybe entrepreneurship was looked at as a nice to have. But I think now there's the realization that a lot of critical and vital sectors like, you know, food, health, education, a lot of those will come out of the ventures that the ecosystem is creating, that are coming out of the ecosystem. So I think entrepreneurs, I think SMEs as a whole stand to gain from that realization, and obviously from the big digital adoption that's taking place. I mean, one of the key challenges that entrepreneurs used to face, I say pre-COVID, hopefully this will change, is access to market. You know, I've supported over 120 startups within Shari'a, and every time we try and introduce them to corporates or government entities, the process is quite cumbersome. You know, for them to build that trust with the startup and give those startups an opportunity to prove their concepts and so on. But I think that's going to change now. And so I think it's exciting times for entrepreneurs, because they will be able to integrate themselves into the supply chains of big corporates and government entities. And we're already starting to see this. You know, I think a lot of the times we assume that the support that SMEs will get will be either, you know, through cost reductions or through cash transfers and stimulus packages and so on. But I think the biggest form of support that we can give entrepreneurs is to actually integrate them into our supply chain and give them an opportunity to sell their products and services. So I think that's going to be one key thing that changes in the landscape. I think the second key thing, so we talked about access to market. I think the second key thing, interestingly, post-COVID will be access to talent. You know, now that we've kind of seen this increased decentralization because of work from home or remote work, I think the realization that we can now, as entrepreneurs, as SMEs, actually build global teams. It really doesn't matter where you live. You can live anywhere and still work for a company. So I think it'll really give SMEs access to a global pool of talent. And on top of it, you know, the other change is obviously, since a lot of this is remote work, and we've seen this, by the way, with a lot of our startups, is they've actually started giving up their offices. So there's that opportunity to also save costs. So I think the cost structure for startups will be significantly different post-COVID. I think there'll be, you know, the reduction in administrative fees, you know, registration, licensing fees, but also reductions in rent. And then finally, and I think Salim alluded to this, is basically, I think the big change that we're going to see is regulation changing and kind of the fast tracking of innovations in various sectors. Obviously, two sectors that come to mind, fintech, and a very relevant sector nowadays is health tech as well. So I think the government is starting to take steps to actually allow, you know, to deregulate in some ways and allow some of these innovations to come to market faster. Obviously, we've all heard of the, you know, the stories like Theranos and so on. So that's not to say regulation is not important. It's absolutely important, but it needs to be done in a way that's fit for purpose and allows for, you know, like I said, the faster adoption or the quicker adoption of some of these technologies. But overall, I'm very bullish about the post-COVID SME landscape. I think there are going to be some really great opportunities that come out of this dislocation. And, you know, I think entrepreneurs are best positioned to actually take advantage of those opportunities.
I want to switch to Ayman. Many Arab Gulf states utilize their years of investment, industrial transformation, and it finally paid off in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, with swift shift to remote working and using tracing apps to limit the pandemic. But the media often does neglect Egypt's story when it comes to digitalization and the rise of startups. And you work extensively through the AUC Venture Lab with a lot of startups. So what do you have to tell us more about Egypt in this case?
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and it's a pleasure to be with you all and with a group of wonderful friends from all over the region. Let me just put this in context. When we talk about digitalization in Egypt, Egypt is a country of 100 million people, a large population, and also a very diversified economy. So we have a large sectors in agriculture, which employs around 1/3 of the population of the country, manufacturing, services, especially a big tourism sector, retail services, and a very diverse economy. So when you put digitalization in that sector, the ability of different sectors to jump in that situation varies depending on the nature of their business. So, but let's take a look at 3 points of what we had in Egypt. So first thing, looking at the infrastructure. Over the past, I would say 2 decades, Egypt has invested substantially in the digital infrastructure. Today, we have more SIM cards than we have people in Egypt. We have more than 100 million SIM cards. It's almost universal connectivity. More than 50% of the population is connected in a digital way to the internet. And they're a very avid user of all the different applications that are out there. And we have the infrastructure has proved to be very robust and resilient, with a big part of the economy shifting online. So over the past 3 months, we've seen many people shifting their business, their operations, their communication, their education online. And we've seen actually, as Salim was saying, an increase in adoption and increase in usage of the different types of technologies. So that's in terms of the infrastructure, and we're expecting this to grow. The government is increasing the investment in the physical infrastructure, but they're also looking at the human side, the talent side, as Najla mentioned, as well as the regulatory, the enabling regulatory environment side. Second point, and that's an example of a major sector, the education sector in Egypt. So for the past 5 years, there was a very large effort in digital transformation of the educational sector. Every student in the public schooling system in Egypt is now operating on a tablet. They're receiving their education and they're doing papers, submitting them, and the whole public educational sector actually managed to move with a flip of a switch online. We have more than 20 million students in Egypt that are now completing their education online. It's enabled by all the technologies that we see. We've had all the glitches you can imagine in the world, but it is up and running. And that was a major accomplishment that people felt it. And a lot of skeptics of the digital transformation are actually now saying, wow, this is impressive. Would love to see more of that in different parts of the economy. A third point, when we look at the startups and how they're facilitating the transition, enabling other sectors in a digital way, we see a huge growth in mobile payments. We have more than 15 million mobile wallets in Egypt, and we have a rapid growth in that space. We see a rapid increase in e-commerce. A lot of people are sitting at home and they're not able to shop, and many of the retailers are moving some of their activities and selling online. Some of them are doing e-commerce platforms, and others are just selling on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and the like. And they're actually reaching a big part of their population. It's literally a forced digital transformation on the spot that people are going through. And it's just impressive how people manage to adapt, and the consumers are adopting that new mindset in an interesting way. We're seeing many other examples of digitizing ordering online. You can order your coffee, you can pick it up in front of the stores. It's just the startups are booming all over the place and acting as enablers for that space. So I'm very happy to see that happening. And as Salima is saying, it's basically moving, accelerating the digital transformations, like we're moving in time, whole decade to the future. And despite the problems of the corona, at least that's one of the positive effects that I can see happening out of it.
Fatma, welcome back. I'm glad that you joined us. I'm not sure how much did you miss, but we're glad that you're with us right now. Bahrain is the digital star in the Middle East. Amazon launched data centers in Bahrain. That cemented the reputation of Bahrain as a digital jewel in the Gulf. During the pandemic, Bahrain adopted contactless technology as part of the response to fight the pandemic. A lot of startups were integrated as part of the government response. That's also phenomenal. But how can Bahrain could build upon this technological and digital transformation to diversify the economy? And we know the numbers, we know the Bahraini economy. So what's your take on that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of
Fatma?
I think she has technical challenges. You're on mute, Muhammad.
Fatma? Okay. So to you, Slim, actually, picking up on where we left the conversation, tourism globally has been the hardest hit sector, major losses, and the Middle East and North Africa as a region is not immune to the losses. But recently we have been seeing a new phenomenon, digital tourism. You have the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism announcing virtual tours to cemeteries and temples. Similar issues have been in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. How can big tech help that growing industry and support governments in this effort?
Yeah, those countries like Bahrain already so focused on digitalizing their economies are those that have been able to react quickest to contain the pandemic and that have been able to adapt most seamlessly to the widespread disruption. Bahrain sees the digital economy as a new economy that further diversifies economic activities. Fintech field is vital for the digital economy. Bahrain will see a surge in the use of fintech platform as consumers turn away from physical offering during the COVID-19 pandemic, which this could boost the industry in the country and wider Gulf region. In the past, it was more of a luxury to use digital market banking, but now the COVID-19 is here. People feel they have to interact online, and we have seen an uptake in contactless and digital payments. For example, use of national digital wallets, which called Benefit Pay, has surged by over 1,000% during the pandemic time. Today, there are over 444,000 registered users, which is about more than 28% of Bahrain's population. Moreover, Bahrain has already taken steps that help into digitizing of economy, like establishment of an excellent ICT infrastructure and creating regulatory regimes that meet the requirements of financial technology, such as launching the FinTech Sandbox by Central Bank of Bahrain and establishment of region's biggest FinTech incubator, which called FinTech Bay. Now Bahrain is a home for more than 400 financial institutions and has significantly pivoted away from being an oil-led economy. Financial service contributes more than 60.7% of GDP. And since the countries with deeper, more developed financial systems have higher economic, the development of digital payments and broader digital economy in Bahrain can be accelerated more and more through responsible development and oversight of emerging fintech companies.
Thank you, Fatma, for that. Salim, I think I already mentioned the question about the role of big tech in helping government efforts into transforming into digital tourism.
Sure. So it's thank you for this question. And in fact, tourism is very important in the MENA region. I think in Egypt, it's what 12% of the GDP. Every family has someone that works in Egypt. The UAE transformed itself into a hospitality hub, so it is critical. The role of tech is very, very important because you know, I just you have to understand that tourism. Of course, there are the big airline companies, and maybe they were the first to digitize a long time ago, and we know how this works, and the hotel business as well. But what really is at the heart of it is the small SMEs. You know, again, I'm going back to the small and medium-sized enterprises. If you take a country like Egypt, they could be at the heart of the economic recovery. And Najla mentioned access to markets, access to talent, very, very important stuff, but also they need to have access to online facilities. So to start with, right? And that is this is where we play a role. And I just give you an example. There is as an illustration a program called Google My Business that will allow small and medium-sized enterprises to go online and teach them how to prosper, survive, and grow online. And there are some host of training for entrepreneurs on how to get there. And tourism is at the tourism is very important there. What we have to remember, though, and it's very important, is that we talk about digitization. You should not digitize your problems. We used to say this all the time. So you need to transform the business model. So that business model need to be transformed. And the good news, and Ayman mentioned to it that there is a big appetite for it. I'm not surprised because the MENA region The young people less than 25 are more than 50% of the population, so they are digital natives. They just embrace these things, and we have to rely on them to transform the business model of tourism, not to digitize our old problems. So there is a silver lining there. However, and I go back to what we were talking about, you need also to give those tourism SMEs, because I think actually the SME sector will be hit so hard by the COVID crisis. It's well known worldwide. In the MENA region, I'm sorry, but I struggle to find a single policy today that actually helps the SMEs, as if most of the policies are focusing on the large enterprises. So for the small and medium-sized enterprises, they need to survive at COVID so that they can prosper again. And to do so, they will need definitely access to finance. And I know we launched globally a finance to SMBs, a fund to help SMBs. This is very important. Also training, and I mentioned a couple of programs that we do for training SMEs. And finally, productivity tools. So SMEs and tourism in particular must have easy access to tools like we're using today. Shouldn't be challenged technically. They should be able to embark on something. I use a key word here, the cloud. The cloud is very important in terms of transforming tourism and these industries. So this is the role of tech. It is at the heart of it. However, transformation is as important as digitization. Again, you can't just digitize your problems, otherwise we go back to square zero.
Thank you, Salim. To Najla, actually to pick up on what Salim talked about, SMEs. So the UAE announced major stimulus packages to support SMEs to mitigate the fallout from COVID-19. Do you think it's enough? In your view, if there's anything other than that the government can offer to help SMEs? Specifically, they are at the core of the diversification effort for UAE and most of the Gulf Arab states.
Yeah, thank you. I think the response has been good. I think if we just kind of revisit some of the things that have been done, so there's been a response at a federal level. Where there's, the central bank stimulus package, which was, given to support the banking system while providing relief to SMEs. But then there's a lot that was also done on an emirate level, on a free zone level. So different entities were providing their own forms of support. On an emirate level, for example, there were, reductions in utility bills, potentially custom fee reductions. There were rent waivers, free zones, not charging for renewal. And then there's institutions like us, like Shura', where we kind of launched a $1 million solidarity fund to provide relief to our startups as well. So these are grants of up to $50,000. And there are other entities, obviously, around the UAE, Khalifa Fund and Dubai SME, each has had their own response. On an overall level, though, let's look at the central bank response. The size of the package, if you include all the other benefits that we talked about from the emirate level and the free zone benefits, in approximately it would be around $80 billion, and that's around 20% of the GDP. So it is a good number. It's comparable to the size of the stimulus packages announced around the world in developed countries around the world. I think the challenge for us, though, when we talk about SMEs, is to question how much of that stimulus is trickling down to SMEs, right? The central bank is providing this funding to banks, but are banks willing to lend that to SMEs? Are they going to provide new loans to SMEs, or are they just going to be kind of extending loans to sort of the bigger corporate customers that they have? So I think that's the big question, is how much of that stimulus package is actually accessible by SMEs. I think the other like I said, benefit to SMEs is the reduction in fees. And I think one thing that you talked about, what could be done or what more could be done, I think a lot of these reductions are seen as temporary reductions in response to the crisis. And I think we should be looking at potentially making these really, permanent measures that we can put in place to support the private sector. Because I don't think, and I'm not sure, but I don't think these measures alone would necessarily free up the working capital and the cash flow needs for these startups. So I do think we need to be a little bit more creative in our response to the crisis. I think, to be honest, it's a little bit early to judge. We were in respond mode for the last 2 months, and I didn't think we would jump to recover mode as quickly as we did. So if you had asked me a month ago, I thought that this was going to be going on till September, potentially till the end of the year. But here we are, in June, and businesses are 100% back to normal. So I really do think it's a little bit too early to judge. But I do know that it's a defining moment for a country like the UAE that's trying to position itself as an investment hub. So I do know that business owners around the world and the private sector in general, which we're trying to build and that we're trying to support, has all eyes on us and is watching the way we respond to this crisis. So if we do want to attract things like FDI in the long term, our response in terms of the support we provide to the private sector is going to be really critical. I think I talked about some of the temporary measures being made permanent, making sure that the measures that are kind of taken top down are trickling down to the SMEs and the entrepreneurs that need it. I think we've got a combination of top down measures and bottom up measures happening at the individual level, but we do need to make sure that they're entirely broad based and accessible by everyone in the economy and not just particular, bigger sized companies. I think it's worth, the other thing I would say is it's worth benchmarking our response against other countries and trying to look at some of the creative ways other countries may have responded, whether it's sort of fast tracking regulation, whether it's cash stimulus payouts for residents, cash incentives for adopting renewable energy. I just don't think the old playbook of responding to economic recessions, perhaps as has been done in the past, 2008 and so on, will necessarily fit the bill in this case. So we do need to kind of dig deep and come up with some creative measures to really support the SME environment.
Ayman, I would actually use the opportunity that we have. You're with us right now, and you're working with AUC Venture Lab. So you're exposed to a lot of growing fintech, healthcare, digital health startups. Growing numbers, you have a great track record. How COVID-19 will impact that growing industry in Egypt when it comes to finances, regulations, business plans? Are they going to utilize the opportunity? How do you see the landscape in Egypt?
Thank you, Mohammed. Over the past decade, we've seen a very rapid growth in the startup ecosystem in Egypt. We've also always had entrepreneurs, but most of the entrepreneurship that we had in Egypt and probably in the region was more traditional. In Egypt, it was focusing on manufacturing. In the Gulf, it was focusing on retail. And you would see that as a part of the kind of the DNA of our economies. But 10 years ago, we started getting the tech startups that are transforming with innovative solutions, especially on the ICT side, transforming different sectors of the economy. So we've built a very strong sector here. Same thing for the UAE, for Jordan, for Lebanon, for Saudi. We're starting to see actually some of the growth in those sectors in the region as a very positive phenomena, transformative phenomena. So now let me talk about 4 specific parts as an outcome of that pandemic. First thing, we're seeing a big acceleration in the digital transformation. And I mentioned part of it before, and Najla, Salim, and Fatma mentioned to that. We're seeing a lot of sectors that are trying to figure out how can I add digital to my play. Supply chain, a very traditional sector all over the region and in Egypt. And is now people are looking at digital solutions. A startup called Maxap, for example, they're working with FMCGs, large FMCGs in Egypt to try and automate parts of the supply chain. Most of the retail distribution system in Egypt is around, or at least 80% of it is around small informal kiosks and retail outlets. And FMCGs have a problem managing their supply chain, managing the working capital, managing the physical distribution of goods and services, the storage in an efficient way. So now when you start getting solutions into that space that are helping the FMCGs, but also helping a lot of the small SME retailers and distributors automate, modernize, get online, manage their inventory in a better way, manage their working capital in a better way. That's a big transformation. Areas about fintech is actually another huge area of transformation. We're seeing the first phase is more about payments. I want to pay in a digital way, and we're seeing a rapid growth in that space. But very quickly now we're getting into a second phase where we're starting to get micro and nano finance, alternative credit scoring, working capital for SMEs that are starting to flow, and several platforms that are getting into that space. And then the next phase, we're looking at additional use cases, applications that are coming here, whether things that help with savings and wealth management, brokerage applications, insurance, insurtech, all of that. So these are the kind of the upcoming waves. So we're seeing a lot of transformation about that. And I'm very happy that actually to see the adoption with people challenged under COVID. A second point is challenging the business model. A lot of the startups and the businesses in general, they had to transform their business models and figure out how to survive, whether a small company trying to sell online or whether a tech startup that was selling a certain product and now they find that their market is diminishing, but there's another adjacent market that's growing and they're pivoting and moving very quickly and adjusting. And that's the kind of agility that we love to see in that sector. We're seeing this across the whole region and companies that are transforming their business models very quickly. Now, the third point, which you talked about, is the support ecosystem. We have a very nice and thriving space for support programs, incubators, accelerators. AUC is one example. Shara, which Najla heads, is another wonderful example. And we're seeing a lot of them trying to support the startups at a challenging time to pivot or adjust or adapt. At AUC Venture Lab, we are 8 years old. We've accelerated now almost 200 startups, 199 to be specific. And collectively, 50% of them have raised investments, more than $150 million, mostly in seed and some Series A investments. We have One Star Swivel, which is the biggest logistics provider startup in the region. And we're seeing a lot of action in that space. We work with the entrepreneurs to try and figure out with them how to be resilient in that situation. I think the game used to be a game of speed and efficiency last year. Right now, it's a game of resilience and adaptation. And we have in our mindset in the region, by the nature of all the problems that we have, a culture of resilience. You know what, I will survive. Life is tough, the environment is tough, and I have a lot of adversity around me, but I will survive and I will do well. And that is a strong part of the DNA of our startups. And we see them adapting in very interesting ways, very creative ways, changing their business overnight to something that is useful, making money, and in some cases even thriving and building a new ecosystem. So that's what's happening. Last point, which is actually, you mentioned the investments. I would love to see more investments, venture capital and angel investments jumping into the place. We had the beginnings of a growing venture capital space in Egypt, in the Gulf, in the Arab region in general. But I think a lot of people are just looking and kind of trying to wait and see. But I would encourage many of the investors to jump in. The opportunities are amazing. And wealth is made in times like these, not in times of prosperity, but in times of challenge, where people build businesses that solve real problems and grow very fast. So I hope to see a lot more investments jumping into that place. Thank you, Mohammed.
Fatma, I think we discussed this before, and I have seen a lot of your talks. Despite the fact there has been government efforts to address the gender gap, but tech actually has higher tendency for gender imbalance. How can we help address this problem, whether from a private sector perspective, think tank perspective, or government perspective? Fatma, we cannot hear you.
No, it's okay. It's important to close the digital gender gaps and encourage women with STEAM skills to participate in the formal economy in the MENA region. Public sector interventions, including promoting digital literacy skills and confidence for girls and women, are vital to bridging the digital gender gap, which is 17% for Arab countries, according to the International Telecommunication Union at 2017. And in order to encourage women, particularly STEAM graduates, to participate in the workforce, MENA countries can systematically start to deploy strategies that promote flexible work patterns, lifting restrictive laws, and promoting more gender balanced workplaces. Hard and technological new economy in the region will require a stronger set of skills, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, than now exists. This shortfall can be filled by attracting more women into the technology industry, where they account for just 24% of the global ICT workforce, according to the World Economic Forum report. It has been estimated that increasing women's participation in the workforce could add 2.7 trillion to MENA's regional GDP by 2025. So MENA could likely gain significantly by closing the gender gap in the technology industry and those affected by the technology that is vital virtually for every industry. In Arab countries, female college students on average outnumber male students, and the Arab countries have the highest proportion of female STEAM graduates in the world. UNESCO estimates that some 34 to 57% of STEAM graduates in Arab countries are women, significantly higher than in US and Europe. Yet, the region also has the lowest rates of female labor participation, which means this truth of women's STEAM skills is untapped and underutilized. Many females stay at home or work in another non-technology sectors. This is how we can help promoting women in the IT field.
Thank you, Fatma. That was a very wonderful panel. I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, we are 9:50 and we have a panel next. So thank you to our speakers for an excellent panel and for our international audience to joining us today. We'll end on time, just to allow everyone to join the conference next panel that will discuss the social contract in the digital age that begins at 11 a.m. You can find the link in the Q&A part of your screen, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.